Members, I call the Environment, Natural Resources, Policy, and Finance Committee to order. A quorum is present. Representative Schultz, can you confirm, have you looked at the minutes?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have reviewed the minutes and I move their adoption.
Representative Schultz moves the minutes from March 6th. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes carry. First up is HF 1425 Skraba. Looks like he's gathering his materials for his presentation.
I am. Thank you.
And I would move that 1425 be laid over for possible inclusion in a future bill for Representative Skraba. If you would like to start your presentation, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The intent of my bill is to stop the sale of the land inside the boundary waters to the federal government. I have, and I apologize, I thought it was, and it's not, so I'm going to read it rather than let you guys. This is from Public Law 88-577, the 1964 Wilderness Preservation System Act. Section 5, state and private lands within wilderness areas. In any case where the state-owned or privately owned land is completely surrounded by national forest lands within areas designated by this act as wilderness, such state or private owners shall be given such rights as may be necessary to assure adequate access to such state-owned or privately owned land by such state or private owner and their successors in interest, or the state-owned land or privately owned land shall be exchanged for federally owned land in the same state of approximately equal value under authorities available to the Secretary of Agriculture's. Transfers restriction. Provided, however, that the United States shall not transfer to a state or private owner any mineral interests unless the state or private owner relinquishes or causes to be relinquished to the United States the mineral interest in the surrounded land. So basically, what Public Law 88577 states is it has to be a trade, not a sale, a trade. And throughout the years here, there's been different entities that want to do hybrids, sales, all of different, and it falls apart. It doesn't work. The law, to me, is real clear, super clear, a trade. It has to be traded. So the purpose of my bill is to make us go back to the federal law and work within the federal law to make this work. There was talk that there was going to be a partial sale, partial not. Our communities that I represent need state forests, not only for logging, but for mining. And the money from, excuse me, the money from our minerals in northern Minnesota, I will use some numbers here for you. Mintac, it's a U.S. Steel property in Virginia, Minnesota, pays about 25 to 30 million per year into the Permanent School Trust Fund. It takes about 9 to 12 months to completely mine 40 acres. There's at least 600 acres of federal land near Mintac that could be that we could trade for. That would send 25 to 30 million per year into the school trust fund. The offer as it stands right now is $30 million for all 80,000 acres. That is not a deal. That is not something the state of Minnesota should do. I think we're better stewards of the land. I think we can do a better job. So my bill is just to say, we're not selling, we're trading. Let's trade, let's find, right now there's about 5,000 acres north of Mintac. And if we could find a small trade, let's start with 5,000 acres and see how that works. That alone pays for what we have. I do have letters, and the logging, the other issues that I do want to talk about. The forest in northern Minnesota, our forest has county, state, federal, everybody. It's a hybrid of everywhere. The goal would be to take that state land in the boundary waters, the school trust land, and trade that with the federal government in an area where we have state with federal just blocked and locked inside of it. Let's just sit down and let's do those and make it so that when we put a logging sale up for sale, we don't have to go through the federal process. We just use the state's process. That just makes sense. And we're not even doing that. We're not even trying. So I tried doing this last time, 2 years ago, and there was no appetite for it. And then now there's a big push to purchase the land now, and I'm like, no, we can't. In good conscience, I cannot support $32 million for 80,000 acres. It's just, it's not fair to the people of Minnesota, and I just think it's time to have this discussion and find out. Let's trade the land. The law is real clear, super clear. And with that, I just take some questions, and I appreciate your support on this.
All right, thank you, Representative Skraba. We got a couple of testifiers. We'll start with Aaron Vandeland, Minnesota Office of School Trust Land. Aaron, if you could make your way forward. Please introduce yourself for the record and share your thoughts on the bill.
Thank you, Chair Heintzeman, Lead Fisher, members. Aaron Vandeland, School Trust Lands Director. I'd like to thank you in advance for the opportunity to talk about this bill today and speak in opposition to House File 1425. And Representative Skraba, I think you're absolutely right. This is an excellent time to have this discussion, so I appreciate the bill. I'm going to start by saying I think this is a very bad time to talk about return on investments from the stock market after the last couple of days. So I wrote this preparing for this, but I just want to first remind the committee of what my role is. And my role is to provide advice to the legislative branch and the executive branch on all things school trust lands, including sales. Our office is guided by the goal of the Permanent School Fund, which is in statute. It's 127A31, and it requires us to secure the long-term maximum return from those lands consistent with our fiduciary responsibilities imposed in the Constitution, consistent or with sound natural resource and management principles. That guides our work. We take an objective analysis to all projects that DNR proposes, all bills that are introduced, and make no mistake, selling school trust lands is the last opportunity that we can make off of school trust lands to fund education. This is not a land management issue. This is an education funding issue. These lands have been locked in the boundary waters since 1964 and have earned $0 for education. Zero. I don't dispute that Representative Skraba thinks that these lands are important for his communities. I know that they are an important part of the rural economy, but the land exchange is off the table. It is not an option. The federal government removed that option when we withdrew our proposal as a state. We did that for a number of reasons. One was a disagreement on the appraised value, and two was comments that were received during the NEPA process that the federal government undertook. Some of those comments required or requested that the trust not expand its ownership inside the 1854 Treaty Authority area. So again, selling lands is our last opportunity to make revenue off of these lands. These lands haven't generated revenue in over 60 years. And just as an example of why it's important not to sell the lands, when I took this position in September of 2015, I agreed with the Dayton administration, or I should say got the Dayton administration to agree that we needed a moratorium on the sale of school trust lands while we inventoried them. And we still have that moratorium. We sell very few school trust lands a year. usually less than 200 acres, they're usually as a result of a trespass or something along those lines. With respect to the boundary waters lands, as I said, the exchange is not viable. We did get laws passed in 2012 that expedited the land exchanges, required us to identify lands or prioritize lands for that exchange that would have done exactly what Representative Skraba said. Unfortunately, those lands were not available from the federal government. We started off with a 90,000 acre pool of lands for trade. That quickly dwindled down to roughly 30,000 acres. So those lands were taken off the table. We didn't have the opportunity to exchange for those lands. When the exchange was pulled and we only had an opportunity to move forward with a sale to resolve this issue, the Office of School Trust Land was asked to provide some analysis on what the long-term economic benefit to the beneficiaries were. This isn't long-term benefit to the communities that Representative Skraba is talking about. These lands are for the beneficiaries. 850,000 students in K through 12 education. 300 plus school districts, 180 plus charter schools receive those benefits every year. I did that analysis. It's not a full-blown economic analysis. I'm not an economist, I'm an attorney. That analysis was pretty straightforward on what the return on investment would be if we were to sell those lands and invest that in the stock market. I modeled it over a 50-year period, because that is the period of an average rotation for a forest. $30 million, again, I recognize what happened in the stock market the last couple of days. $30 million invested by our State Board of Investment, who does an excellent job. Over 50 years, that $30 million, because of compounding, turns into $800 million. $30 million invested at half of that rate, 3.5, is $400 million. The return on investment from investing in forest lands over that same period is $4.5 million. This is magnitudes greater to invest it in stocks and spin off interest and dividends, and that's what funds education. The sale of the lands will secure that long-term interest for the school trust. It will consolidate the federal government's ownership in the boundary waters. We are not exchanging our mineral rights. Mineral rights were never on the table. And also moving forward with the sale respects our obligations to the tribal nations in the state. With that, I'll stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Assistant Commissioner Bob Meyer, DNR. Commissioner?
Good afternoon, members. For the record, Bob Meyer, Assistant Commissioner, Department of Natural Resources. And I'm going to keep my testimony rather brief since Director Vanderlyn covered most of what I was going to say. I do appreciate the role of the Office of School Trust Lands, and I appreciate the support of Representative O'Driscoll and Dietrich and the House and the Senate in creating that role. This is exactly what he is here to do. Advise us, fiduciaries, you are all elected officials and appointed members of Minnesota's executive branch and government are fiduciaries. We hold a fiduciary responsibility to the school trust, and that's what Aaron does. He provides that information to us. I think it's very valuable, and to take a nonpartisan look at those issues. So I appreciate his comments. We do support the testimony of Aaron, and appreciate the fact that he brought up that the mineral rights aren't negotiable right now. That just as the state retains our mineral rights when we sell land, the federal government retains their mineral rights when they sell land as well. So as much as mining of those lands would be great to get to, I don't know how we would negotiate for those assets with the federal government through an appraised value. So understand the desire for the conversation and just appreciate the committee's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Aaron, Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. Please introduce yourself for the record and go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Heintzeman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on HF 1425. My name is Aaron Clems, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, or MCEA. MCEA is a nonprofit organization celebrating our 50th year. Actually, we just got done celebrating that. It's our 51st year of using law and science to protect the state's natural resources and the health of its people. The 80,000 acres or so of school trust lands located in the 1.1 million acre Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness are a long-standing discussion item, both in the area and also here in St. Paul. They are the residue of history. This is land that was set aside in 1858 to pay for education, but was withdrawn from sale by a series of federal actions going all the way back to the 1909 designation by President Theodore Roosevelt that established what has become the Superior National Forest. So a bit of historical perspective on these lands. These lands have historically been sold for the purpose of funding schools. There's a reason why there's not much of this school trust land in the southern two-thirds of the state. Since the establishment of Minnesota as a state in 1958, Sections 16 and 36 were reserved for education, and across the southern half of Minnesota, nearly all of this land has been sold. It's been sold for the purpose of funding the construction of schools. Some of that land was reserved and then used for the purpose of putting a school on top of it. And it's true that there's been a lot of different ways that we've managed school trust lands over the years, but certainly selling land is not something that we've never contemplated before. In fact, that's the way that most of the school trust land that was held by the state of Minnesota was disposed of. Secondly, this legislature has made the goal of managing the school trust to secure the greatest long-term investment for the trust. Made the administrator a fiduciary. I won't reread Minnesota Statute 127A31, but it's really clear, right? You've asked Aaron Vandelin, the school trust land administrator, to administer the trust on behalf of the school children of Minnesota to maximize the long-term economic return. So that brings me to HF 1425. Years of experience show that managing school trust acres for resource extraction only, nearly all logging in terms of the actual acreage that's being used, provides a meager return to the trust, basically breaking even. The return from a sale to the federal government is not just a one-time return, as was noted by Mr. Vandelin's testimony, but it is an investment that will compound over time and result in much higher returns than the alternatives. In addition, a sale makes good resource management sense. It consolidates ownership into one government body, which reduces conflicts and creates consistency. Indeed, that's why both the state and federal government have pursued an end to this conflict that goes all the way back to statehood. Over the years, there's been a lot of, asking about what about the kids? What about the kids in these lands? Well, that's my question today. What about the kids? Are these school trust lands in the Boundary Waters an asset for the school trust or a wedge issue? Are the wants of the timber industry greater than the needs of the school trust to maximize the long-term economic return to school kids? HF 1425 conflicts with the goals in statute. If the bill advances, it will show that years of concern about revenue into the school trust weren't genuine but strategic. The legislature has made the school trust administrator a true fiduciary to the school children of Minnesota, so let him do that. And please vote no on HF 1425, or don't include it in a further bill as you go down the line. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. And next is Amanda Hefner, Save the Boundary Waters. As Amanda makes her way, I'll just quickly mention, if folks did the math or wanted to do the math offhand, I think at 80,000 acres, $30 million, that's $375 per acre. Interesting. It seems somewhat low if you ask me, but go ahead and introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, Chair Heintzeman. Members, my name is Amanda Hefner, and I am testifying today on behalf of Save the Boundary Waters. I am here to oppose HF 1425. This legislation would prohibit the sale of state-owned lands in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness to the U.S. Forest Service and repeal Minnesota Statute Section 9282. Such a result would be harmful to public education funding for Minnesota students, violate the trust under which state school trust lands were transferred to the state of Minnesota, and also frustrate the consolidation of federal ownership of Minnesota's crown jewel, the Boundary Waters. When Minnesota became a state in 1858, the federal government granted Sections 16 and 36 of each township to the state for the purpose of funding education. Section 8 of the Minnesota Constitution requires that the proceeds of sales of the school trust lands be deposited into a permanent school fund. Approximately 80,000 acres of school trust lands are currently within the Boundary Waters and do not generate revenue for the permanent school fund. If these lands were sold to the U.S. Forest Service, the proceeds would be deposited into the permanent school fund where they would generate investment returns for Minnesota schools in perpetuity. This bill advocates for an exchange, but the state of Minnesota and the Forest Service have determined that an exchange of these lands is not feasible and that a sale is not in the public's best interest. Additionally, an exchange would deprive 3 Ojibwe bands that signed the Treaty of 1854 of their rights to hunt, fish, and gather on U.S. forest lands. The state would receive in exchange because those rights do not exist on state-owned land. Financial analyses have shown that Minnesota students would be far better off if the school trust lands in the Boundary Waters were sold to the U.S. Forest Service and the proceeds were deposited into the permanent school fund. A purchase by the U.S. Forest Service would deliver to the fund approximately $847 million in 50 years, whereas a land exchange and logging of federal lands acquired by the state would be significantly less. Exchange parcels would also not include mineral interest, and mining would not be available on federal parcels, which was discussed. That would become state lands. This sale is good economics and consolidates land ownership in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, and for these reasons, I encourage you to oppose this bill and instead support the sale of school trust lands located within the Boundary Waters to the U.S. Forest Service. Thank you for your time and allowing me to testify today.
Thank you, and I'll just quickly check, as we often do, is there anybody else in the audience that would like to testify? Not seeing any, I will open it up to member questions, or I think we might have an amendment. Lead Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Heintzeman. I would like to offer the DE1 amendment. This would say that we would go ahead and encourage the sale of the land in the BWCA. And we've heard a number of items brought up here from our testifiers. I think some of the important things that we need to keep in mind as we're looking at this is that, number one, this would provide income right off the bat that we don't have right now. We are taking a look at significant amounts of income that would come in for our schools here within the district. And eventually it would also put the end very differently. We're going to take care of this once and for all. The federal government has authorized $50 million out there to proceed with the sale. We just need to get things moving on our end here, and I think the quicker we can do it, the better. And the other thing that I like about the fact that we've got the sale is it's preserving the treaty rights for the tribes versus if we're doing swapping of land, et cetera. Having talked to this amendment, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to withdraw it at this time. And instead, because we've talked so much about the fact that this has an impact on our education system of our funding, I would rather make a motion that we re-refer this to the Education and Finance Committee, because I feel that's something that has the potential of having as much as $800 million in finance funding for education, should really be looked at by that committee first.
Okay, members, with the amendment withdrawn and a motion to re-refer to the Education Finance Committee. Do we take that up now or later? All those in favor of the motion to refer to the Education Finance Committee, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Nay. Motion does not carry. The bill will not be going to the Education Finance Committee. Representative Skraba. Actually, hang on. Let's have some discussion. I think that'd be a good time now to do that. So, questions, members? Representative Jacob has a question.
Yeah, I guess it's not so, thank you, Chair Heintzeman. Not so much a question for Representative Skraba, but whenever we've done land acquisition in Winona County when I was county commissioner, government is always required to pay fair market value. They can't pay more than fair market value, but they can't pay under fair market value. And in my part of the state, agriculture land, about 10,000 an acre, crop or wooded land, around 5,000 an acre. And if you took 80,000 acres times 5,000 per acre, that would be $400 million. So how the state would propose to buy this for $30 million, I don't understand that. And why wouldn't the general citizenry be in line to buy it at $375 per acre at that tremendous markdown compared to the government? This just doesn't, I'm not looking for, when the government condemns land, what's the word, not adverse possession. But anyhow, Yeah, eminent domain, that's the word I was looking for. So this just doesn't seem like it falls in line with current practices. And it's more of a comment, I guess, than a question.
Representative Skraba, if you had any comment on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Jacob. The condemnation was used when the boundary waters was set in place in 1964. They went to all the resorts and said, we're taking you. And they gave them fair market value at the time for that. You know, now, apparently that doesn't work when you're dealing with government to government. Apparently you can give them $325 an acre. And more than anything, I guess that since the subject was broached by Representative Fisher, the $50 million that the federal government has set aside, they're willing to give the state $34 million. Where's the other $17 million go? So, I'm just, and some of the other, like, I heard this story about the tribes, that if the state gets the land, the tribes can't hunt on it. And I'm like, they're hunting on our state land now. They're in our state forests, they're in school trust land. They have the same rights as they do in federal land, to the best of my knowledge. And I don't know why it would be different. They're in the boundary waters. I have friends that I hunt with that are natives, and we go in there and hunt. So on school trust land. And I don't understand this part that keeps coming up, that it's the tribes can't use school trust land. I disagree. They're using it now, so.
Representative Fisher, Lead Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Heintzeman. And listening to Representative Jacob about the price of land out there, it varies across the state. I know that here in the Twin Cities, when I first moved into my area in Maplewood, you could get a lot, which is maybe a quarter of an acre, for about $10,000. Right now, if you could find that lot open, it'd be somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000. So land varies of where it is throughout the state. And I think one of the things to help clarify is how is the price determined. I'm wondering if the DNR could come up and maybe answer questions a little bit, is how the price and how the things were set, if they could answer that question.
I believe the Assistant Commissioner is still here, or maybe there's someone else that would like to address that question from DNR. Please introduce yourself for the record, and if you'd like to answer the question.
Afternoon, Chair. My name is Joe Henderson. I am the Division Director for the Lands and Minerals Division, Minnesota DNR. So our appraisal for the Boundary Waters land is dated, and we have a new appraisal out. We should have those numbers soon. But the bottom line is this was done by an independent appraiser. So we hired a professional appraiser outside of the DNR that does this for a living to appraise these lands. Some of the challenges are like lands. Again, you have to take the wilderness designation into consideration, knowing you can't go build a house there. You don't have roads to it. You can't log it. You can't mine it. You can pitch a tent there if you get a permit. You have to put the whole context around the appraised value of the land to come up with what it is fair market value, and I would argue pretty tough to find a market, right, that's real similar. So they looked across the United States at, other parks or lands or other things, and our professional appraiser came up with this value. Again, it's dated. We're looking to update it. That update may drive that price up a little higher. We should have those numbers soon.
Lead Fisher, otherwise I have other members. Go ahead.
No, thank you, Chair Heintzeman. I appreciate that. And I think that's a great example of showing, the independent way that the price is established out there, and that trying to come up with a fair market value sometimes is kind of tough, and I appreciate the fact that it's being updated. Thank you.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Skraba. I mean, there's really no one who knows this area better than you. I know you've lived around the boundary waters. You've almost lived in the boundary waters, for lack of a better way of putting it, for the amount of time that you have spent there. And so I know how deeply you care for this area. You've been a local elected official to the area. You know this issue inside and out, and so I appreciate you bringing this bill. And I'm just struck sort of by some of the comments that I've heard today, because of the landscape that we're working through in the federal, state, and local level here today, and a little bit surprised that there's appears to be this sentiment that this should be at the federal level rather than the state level, when we've heard comments just last week saying we need these protections at the state level. And I don't see, just like looking at the whole, looking at what has been a conversation, I don't see the benefit in transferring this land that's state-owned at this point. It reminds me of the TV show Yellowstone and the value of property, and for the amount of people around this table right here who so value the boundary waters. How could we go along with the sale of land at $375 an acre? I don't know how we could justify that as a state. And so I support your bill, Representative Skraba.
Thank you, Representative Schultz. Representative Jacob, you had another question.
Thank you, Chair Heintzeman. So I guess for the DNR, when you say the appraisal is dated, when is that date?
Looks like we're discussing who to address that. Again, introduce yourself and.
Again, Joe Henderson, Minnesota DNR Lands and Minerals. In discussion with Director Vandelin, 2020 was the original appraisal. They become dated, or stale is another term used, after 5 years. So we're having an appraisal done. It's already actually been done. The data is just not public yet.
So the
Representative Jacob.
Yeah, the 375 acres is from a 2020 appraisal. Is that correct?
That is my
Correct.
understanding.
Okay. And so
Representative Jacob.
So coincidentally, when you compare that to other land in the county, so I'm very familiar with southeast Minnesota, same exact scenario, wooded land, you can't get a permit to build a house on it because of steep slope overlays. You can't mine on it. You can't use it for agriculture. You can't do anything on it except for pitch a tent. But you couldn't buy any land in southeast Minnesota for less than $5,000 per acre. So if you're comparing this to property in the mountainous area of western United States, I don't think that's a fair comparison to other land in Minnesota. And quite frankly, the citizens of Minnesota should have the right to purchase that for $375 if it's going on the auction block for that cheap. So that's my comments.
Representative Finke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a clarifying comment or question for the author. Is the sale of this land for the purposes of owning it because of values of ownership in the state and the beauty and et cetera? And I just heard that we can't mine it and we can't log it and we can't build it and we can't build a road on it. But I heard you say specifically you want to log it and you want to mine it. And I appreciate you saying that, because often we don't just say out loud the thing we're trying to do, but now I'm real confused.
Representative Skraba.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Finke, great question. I was speaking about the land outside the boundary waters. When the land is swapped, then it can be logged, it can be managed. The minerals may take time after that. There may have to be another bill to transfer the minerals. That would come in time. The main thing, our communities rely on wood product to survive. We have different communities that need it, and those are jobs, those are people, those are real, that's tangible. The wilderness, the idea of the school trust land in the wilderness not doing anything, it should do something. You know, somehow that land needs, and I am not advocating for logging or mining in the boundary waters. That's not what I mean. What I mean is the state should just trade the land. the Department of Agriculture, the Secretary of Agriculture, in this law has the ability to trade. And for the life of me, we just need normal, it's a deal. Let's do the deal. Let's sit down and trade this land. And there has to be a solution. One of the issues, and I appreciate your question, one of the issues here, we talk about 80,000 acres. It's really 116,000 acres. 80,000 acres is the school trust. There's still a lot of county land in there, and there is still some private land in there that once their families pass away, then that land reverts back to the federal government. But when the appraisal, we're having a hard time with the appraisal, it's hard to find, how do you put a value on wilderness? Because the appraisal rules, you have all of their books. The question that I have is, the $17 million out of the $50 million is for land outside the boundary waters. Is that $325 an acre too?
Members, just quickly mention, the bill is going to be laid over, and then pointing out, just looking at the clock, we are coming up on just over 30 minutes on this discussion, so we're going to need to wrap it up fairly soon. But Representative Finke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Skraba, for your answer. Yeah, I mean, I know that I'm not a person who comes with detailed information of the value of land and acreage in various parts of the state of Minnesota. But I come from the tradition that says wilderness is doing something, and we should value it and preserve it. I know that that's something else I think we really do probably agree on as a state.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I was confused for a moment, because these types of debates we haven't had for a long time, maybe 6 years. And it's debate by anecdote, debate by personal experience, debate by television shows. And all that masks the reality of this has been dealt with trying to find solutions on transfers, on sales, and all this for decades. Hasn't worked. So this is the last option because people have been trying to solve this. But I thought to myself, Representative Schultz, what was the end of Yellowstone? What happened to the land?
Okay.
They gave it back.
Representative Hansen, thank you for the spoiler. That doesn't really help us if we're trying to get through it. Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That saves me a show. I guess I don't have to watch now. I guess I have a question for Director Vandeland, if he could come back.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And since this bill is not going to ed finance, can you explain why the current proposal means more money for kids? Like, maybe there's something like compounding interest or something that goes into this. Why is the current proposal that's going forward better for every child in Minnesota that goes to school?
Director Vandeland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Jordan, members, Aaron Vandeland, School Trust Lands Director for the record. The money that would be the sale proceeds, let's just call it the sale proceeds. And just to be clear, $30 million was a hypothetical that I used based on the 2020 appraisal. The new number is higher, and I will get to your question, but I want to address some of the inaccuracies. The $51 million that was appropriated from the federal government in 5 separate appropriations was to fund all of it because that's what we thought was would be the appraised value when we got the appraisals. To say that this land has been appraised is an understatement. This land was appraised by the University of Minnesota Duluth in 2005. This was appraised for the Ty Blatnick payments in 2008 and 2018. It was appraised again 6 times for this Boundary Waters project. And now we're doing yet another appraisal. We are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on appraisals. So $30,000 or $30 million was a hypothetical value. 375, yes, does seem low. The appraiser in his report says, I don't know how to value this as wilderness. It's either valuable for wilderness, I'll put it this way. It's valuable as a wilderness asset. It is not valuable as a school trust asset that's supposed to generate revenue. Generating revenue, Representative Jordan. $30 million sale proceeds gets invested in stocks and bonds by the State Board of Investment. Over the last 10 years, their return on investment has been 6.91%. They've had one down year in the last 10. That's where I came up, that's what I used for my calculations. So when I say that $30 million turns into $800 million on that over 50-year period, that will continue to, that's how much the value of that investment will grow. And those investments spin off interest and dividends. And that is what is funneled back every year to the school districts. So they will have more money to invest, which spins off more interest and dividends.
Representative Skraba, we're going to go to closing comments.
I don't, as a legislator, I absolutely respect your job, what you're doing. I can't in good conscience vote to give 80,000 acres of land in an area that we all know is worth way more than $375 an acre. I cannot vote to support that. And that's why this bill is here, to say there's got to be a better way. We all know it's worth more, but just to get rid of it because it's not doing anything, that's not fair either. I don't think that's the right thing to do. And I think where we are right now is if it still needs to be talked about, then great. Hopefully this will spur something so that we can get this, because again, I would love to see it making money, but not $375. I will close with, I hope that this discussion starts the Secretary of Agriculture, the Minnesota DNR, in a talk, and yourself, what to do with this land, because I truly believe all of us working together to solve this. Everyone knows what it is now, and maybe we did before, but now we know, and at least I do, that it needs to be disposed of, but with the law. The law is what I'm going on. So I appreciate your time, and thank you, and I support a yes vote.
Thank you, Representative Skraba. As you are not a member of the committee, I will renew the motion that House File 1425 be laid over for possible inclusion. All those in favor? It's habit, sorry. The bill is laid over. Next up, House File 1570, Representative Skraba, you can stay right where you are. Go ahead and introduce your bill.
Mr. Chair, committee, House File 1570 has to do with Soudan Underground Mine State Park. The original bill that I gave to y'all and wanted is, it is changed and in a sense of, and I don't know where to go with it right now, because this morning, I got a call from one of the landowners, and he was going to come and testify, but he couldn't because he's sick. So now I'm trying to figure out how I want to deal with this. I did talk to Assistant Commissioner Myers. The issue is these boathouses are state-owned on state land, and they're leased. And what we're trying to do is we want these to become permanent. But that would mean a sale of the land, and I'm not there. The bill is, if you read the bill, it says to lease or sell. And quite honestly, after talking with the landowner, what they want, they believe right now there's a limit, and maybe Bob can, Assistant Commissioner Myers can explain it better than I, but right now what the leases are is they're two lifetime leases. And when they're done, they're done. The building falls down, it goes away. And they are on the historic register. And the goal is to, let's keep these boathouses up and running, and let's just transfer them to who wants to pay the lease for it. You know, and if the state benefits from it because they're gonna get money for the lease. That's what the owners want, the people that own it. Unfortunately, the bill doesn't explain it that clear, but it can be construed from the bill, what I just explained, but the sale part would be very, very difficult to do. Not that I'm opposed to it, but the lease the property under the terms and conditions of Minnesota Statutes 92.5 or sell the property. So I would entertain discussion on these. The boathouses, has anyone here ever seen these boathouses? Could you explain, Mr. Chair, if I may, ask Representative Schultz to explain what these are very quickly?
Thank you, Representative Skraba. Before I go to Representative Schultz or any testifiers, I'll just let members know the bill this one is, again, another one being laid over for possible inclusion. Representative Schultz, if you wanted to fill in some of that detail quickly, that'd be great.
Definitely. And so first off, I'll say, for starters, when you're on your northern Minnesota vacation this year, make this one of the stops along the way, not just from what is, the Soudan Underground Mine State Park, but you actually, the best way to view these is to go out on the water on Lake Vermilion and to go and see them by boat, because these are old boathouses, historic by nature, and the rest of the story is told in both the legislation and some of the supporting documents. But these are old boathouses, and because I'm just kind of adding from the conversations that Representative Skraba and I have had on this and the conversations I've had with folks locally to the area outside of Tower in Sudan, is that, over time, these are going to continue to be more and more dilapidated and then essentially fall into the water, have to be cleaned up, removed, and then they're just gone. They're gone. Instead of what I believe Representative Skraba is doing here is helping provide a solution for the longevity of what is a really pretty unique Minnesota feature. And again, this is just in one bay of Lake Vermilion, but a kind of a cool ode to history and the history around Tower and Sudan, and the heart of the very beginning of Minnesota's iron ore mining industry. So it's kind of a convergence of the two and how they have worked well together for a really long time. So it's why I support this bill. I was a co-sponsor in the last biennium and support it today.
Thank you, Representative Schultz. And I think that from DNR Parks and Trails, we have Deputy Director Leversage. Deputy Director, if you'd like to introduce yourself. And
good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Heintzeman. My name is Phil Leversage. I'm the Parks and Trails Division Deputy Director. I'm here to speak on behalf of House File 1570. The DNR has concerns with the proposed legislation, and we actually thought we'd resolved the issue 25 years ago with some compromise legislation. Let me give you a little background. Stunts Bay boathouse leases have been part of Sudan Mine, or what's now known as Lake Vermilion, Sudan Underground Mine State Park, since the land was donated to the state of Minnesota by U.S. Steel in 1965. Up to that time, U.S. Steel leased or allowed miners that worked for U.S. Steel to have these boathouses on U.S. Steel land. At the time of the transfer, U.S. Steel worked with the state to grant 50-year continuation of the leases through 2015 for the original lease owners up until the time they either died or sold the lease. They were able to sell the lease, and in that case, it would only be extended for another 20 years, but in no case past 2015. The boathouse leases are interesting and they are historic, and they are corrugated steel buildings that line the lakeshore of Stunts Bay, and they're on the National Register, and the DNR is working with the State Historic Preservation Office to continue to preserve a representative sample of the boathouses, but there are 158 lakeshore lots, and to maintain 158 individual boathouses may not be practical, and there may be better uses for that portion of the park. Over time, the leases have transferred, and they're now all under the DNR's leasing terms. In 2000, and I'm going to bring up names that some of you might be familiar with, Senator Johnson, Doug Johnson, and Representative Tom Bach proposed a compromise that would allow these leases to continue beyond the life of the original leaseholder. And they proposed language that's been guiding us for the last 25 years. And I'll just share quickly, if I can, the terms of that 2000 legislation. The term of the lease shall be the lifetime of the party issued in the renamed lease, or if transferred, for the lifetime of the party to whom the lease is transferred. Leases can be transferred only once, and the transfer must be to a person within the third degree of kindred or the first cousin according to civil law. So I had to ask my AI to tell me exactly what third degree of kindred is. It's if we share a great-great-grandfather. So they're able to be passed down from the original leaseholder to a descendant, and at the end of that descendant's life, or when they no longer want the lease, they revert back to the state of Minnesota to be used as U.S. Steel originally planned for that land, to be public land and to be there for the enjoyment of all Minnesotans. And that would be the DNR's plan under our current state park management plan for Lake Vermilion, is the portions of the historic district that are not preserved as a remnant of that piece of our history would be restored to some day-use facilities along the lakeshore, and then also be opened up for public access for other folks to have access to getting on and off the lake out of that bay.
Thank you very much for your testimony. That actually helps. I just want to remind members, this bill is just being laid over. It sounds like there's a lot of conversations that still need to happen on this, but we just wanted to have a discussion today. So I don't think we need a long, drawn-out discussion. Representative Schultz, please keep it tight.
Yep, I will do so, Mr. Chair. I'll just be very brief and just say that I think that the solution here, look, there's a ton of recreation opportunities around all of Lake Vermilion. This is unique, and what I really like about this bill is that it's providing a better solution to see the totality of these 150 plus different, and they're right next to each other. So they are boathouse to boathouse to boathouse. It's a very unique thing that I haven't seen before, they're in a varying degree of condition at this point, and I think that the idea of selling them is going to help provide for the longevity of the whole while still having every opportunity throughout the rest of the state park and the rest of the lake to ensure their long-term viability and a lot of fun.
Seeing no other questions, Representative Skraba, anything to close with?
No, Mr. Chair. It's self-evident. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Skraba. So House File 1570 is being laid over for possible inclusion in a future bill. Representative Schultz, House File 1331, if you'd like to make your way down to the desk. Members, House File 1331 is being laid over for possible inclusion. Representative Schultz, if you would like to introduce the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Lead Fisher, members of the committee. Glad to again be before you with another great piece of bipartisan legislation. Thanks to Representative Fisher, which stemmed from an awesome conversation that he and I had while on the way to the governor's State of the State down in southern Minnesota. And so House File 1331 kind of builds some ground for us to have sound science and data as it relates to wildlife management practices. And I'm grateful that the chair has allowed us this opportunity to talk about the wolf population here in Minnesota. Across large swaths of Minnesota, I've heard from farmers, ranchers, sportsmen and women, and hunters concerned about the quickly changing population and the range of wolves in our state. While each of us likely has our own story to tell about our interaction with wolves, I'm hopeful that we can come together on a desire to know and understand the wolf population and how it is continuing to change. In 1979, nearly 50 years ago, the wolf population was only just over 1,200 wolves and largely only found in the vast north woods. And get this, the wolf range was north of the Iron Range, kind of the area that we've been talking about in these previous two bills. At that time, the wolf was federally protected by the Endangered Species Act like it is still today. At that time, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife determined that the wolf population needed to return to north of 1,600 wolves in Minnesota before the population could be considered recovered. Fortunately, today we are living the success of the Endangered Species Act because we are consistently seeing annual population numbers exceed 2,650 wolves over the last decade of the surveys, which quite frankly is only surveying a fraction of the state at this moment. The wolf is a meaningful and significant animal to Minnesotans, from tribal nations to the mascot of one of our major sports teams. So as we look ahead, we need to properly manage the wolf population so that all Minnesotans can enjoy wolves for generations to come, and the ecosystems wolves thrive in can be in balance with one another. Proper management begins with sound science and data. I represent 5 counties in central Minnesota, yet the vast majority of my own district is not included in the current DNR wolf survey zone, despite the fact that my family and my neighbors have been impacted by the growing population over the last 30 years. I'm using 30 years because that basically spans my life. Annually, students in Malacca, the largest city in my district, write letters to me about the wolf debate, not just because their teacher encourages them to do so, but because they have become near experts on the topic as their homes, farms, and communities interact with wolves on a regular basis. The people of Minnesota have asked us to help make sound public policy decisions backed up by facts, science, and data. And today I'm asking for your support of House File 1331 so that on an annual basis, the Department of Natural Resources will conduct a statewide survey of the wolf population so that we can have a better understanding of the way this population is changing, where it is growing, and how it is impacting other wildlife populations. And ultimately, so we can have a holistic, data-driven view for the future. I look forward to testimony and the conversation we'll have today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Schultz. First up on my list is Minnesota Trappers Association, and I think Tim Spreck is going to be speaking for them today. Mr. Spreck, please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Tim Spreck, and I'm here speaking for the Minnesota Trappers Association. The Trappers Association has a long-standing interest in the viability and longevity of the wolf population in Minnesota, and we do support establishing a baseline and ongoing population surveys so that we can properly manage the species. Pretty simply stated, this bill is simple. It does what needs to be done, and we do support it, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spreck. Next, Minnesota Farmers Union, Peter Ripka. Please introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Peter Ripka. Thank you, Chair Heintzeman, for letting me speak today. I'm speaking on behalf of Minnesota Farmers Union and the livestock producers we represent. We feel that the wolf range is, as the population is growing, is going far beyond where the native range is. So we believe that the whole state should be in that survey area, so we know exactly how many wolves are out there. So if future hunting or trapping is allowed, we know where to do it more precisely.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Minnesota Deer Hunters Association, Eric Simonson. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Eric Simonson, and I represent the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association. The MDHA is 11,000 plus members made up of men, women, and youth all across the state of Minnesota. We are an organization created by hunters and for hunters, and for the past 40 years have been building a hunting and conservation legacy through habitat, education, and advocacy. We are grateful to Representative Schultz and other co-authors to House File 1331, which would require an annual statewide wolf population survey and provide us a much more accountable baseline going forward. The MDHA has long been an advocate for active and responsible management of the wolf in Minnesota and will continue to be so going forward. Wolf predation on Minnesota's wild deer herd is excessive in certain areas of the state and severely undermines the rich tradition of deer hunting in the state of Minnesota. With the data collected by an annual and statewide survey, we can all better understand the migration of the wolf and its predatory habits toward wildlife and livestock. As hunters, we believe there are more and more wolves shifting into non-traditional areas of the state. We strongly believe in a data-based approach to the state's wolf management plan, and the results that would be provided under Representative Schultz's bill would provide the scientific data necessary to support more active wolf management. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House File 1331. I'd be happy to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Simonson. Next, Minnesota Farm Bureau, Miles Kuschel. Please introduce yourself for the record and go ahead.
Greetings, Chair Heintzeman and members of the committee. My name is Miles Kuschel. I am testifying today in support of House File 1331 on behalf of the Minnesota Farm Bureau Federation, representing over 31,000 farm and ranch families across the state of Minnesota. I am from Sebeka and serve on the Minnesota Farm Bureau Board of Directors. The district I represent encompasses all of northeastern Minnesota, which includes all the historic wolf territory in the state, although the current wolf range has expanded almost to the Red River Valley to the west, with wolves now stretching into southeastern parts of the state. The issue with wolf predation is front and center on our reality for our third-generation cattle ranch I operate with my family, raising the fourth generation. Additionally, I recently served on the state's Wolf Plan Advisory Committee, playing a role in creating a management plan that can one day be utilized into the betterment of wolves and the farms and ranches they interface with. According to the most recent published wolf survey over the winter of 22-23, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources estimates there are 2,919 wolves in approximately 631 packs across Minnesota's known wolf territory. As a rancher, I recognize the difficulty in obtaining numbers of animals and appreciate the work that the Minnesota DNR, USDA Wildlife Services, and researchers go through to estimate the size of the pack. However, this count may not give us the whole picture on Minnesota's wolf population. Currently, only the wolves in the known wolf range are counted in the wolf survey. Wolves outside of that area are either not counted or included in the estimate of lone wolf incidents. We can't manage what we don't count. And by only counting wolves in less than 1/3 of the state's geographic area, we are doing a disservice to everyone involved in current and future wolf management. House File 1331 would address this issue and ensure that wolves across the entire state are counted in the population survey. Minnesota has and continues to be a leader in wolf ecology. We have done this through decades of research and studies. As the wolf range continues to expand, it's time that we let the Minnesota DNR complete a statewide count to get a more accurate picture of how successful the program has become. Future management decisions will be based on these numbers, which is why it is key to have an accurate statewide count. As we grapple with budget numbers, funding is critical for any research program. The Minnesota DNR could utilize low-cost options such as crowdsourcing, using game cameras or law enforcement reports and camera footage. Another option could easily be a tool that allows the public to submit dates and locations of wolf sightings, such as Minnesota Deer Hunters Wolf Report. I ask that you support 1331 and let us continue to lead the nation in this category and complete a statewide count. I thank the committee for the opportunity to testify today, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kuschel. Next, Deputy Director, DNR, Pat Rivers. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, for the record, my name is Pat Rivers, Deputy Director for the Division of Fish and Wildlife at the Minnesota DNR. We share the author's intent, which is to have accurate information to help us manage wolf populations. Earlier this year, we received an email, those of us at DNR as well as partners of the DNR, about a 5-year survey looking for wolf sign across Minnesota, all of Minnesota. We've been basing our wolf range on this 5-year survey. I can get you a good color map It's also on our website that shows the change of wolf range in Minnesota through time. We are down through Little Falls at this point as of our last survey, and as the author said, we might be expanding that this year. So we'd like to work with the author on how we can better define those ranges, but we do feel that we've got a very efficient method for getting that survey completed. Finally, we'd prefer that to have management need dictate any wildlife survey rather than have that dictated in statute. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Anybody else in the audience today that would like to testify on House File 1331? Not seeing any. Members, questions? Lead Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Heintzeman, and I thank the author for bringing the bill forward. I've been very open to having better understanding of where the wolves are in the state, and we'll probably have different ways that we approach on managing it. So I'll put that up front right off the bat. And one of the things I want to keep in mind as we're doing this is, number one, is one of the things that drives this a lot for me is that we have depredation problems that happen, and I feel that this will be one of the things that could make it easier for those in the ag areas that have depredation occurring, that this may make it easier for them to make their claims. I also know there's parts of the state, particularly in the southeast corner where we don't have wolves yet, where they would love wolves to take care of the deer population because they have more problems with the deer down there. So for me, it's going to be interesting to watch how this progresses and how it interacts across the state. And I also know that one of the things that's real important is we're dealing with this is that we use the science to guide us, because I think one of the things that I've found over the years I've watched is that usually the biggest problem that we have with two issues out there. One is with deer hunting is that, coming from a family of deer hunters, for my siblings and my kids, the biggest thing that impacts them deer from year to year is the amount of snow. And when I saw over the last couple of years where we had that big drop in the herd, that was one of our most severe winters in a long time. And then on top of it, when I take a look at management, is usually where we have the worst problems of deer depredation is when we have lone wolves out there. And that's why I've been having troubles with recreational hunting, because we cause more lone wolves out there. And that's why it's important for us to recognize where the problems are and making sure we're keeping an eye on it. And just want to kind of put that out there and say I'm looking forward to more and better information going forward.
Representative Finke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative, for your bill, I have a couple of questions that, first of all, do we need to do this every year? I would be interested in hearing how often we do it. Now, it sounds like the DNR does do a population survey. Is that normal? Do we do that for other species? We count their populations every year? And I don't know the answer to that, so happy to.
Representative Schultz.
Well, I wanted to just thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Finke. Is there someone from DNR that'd like to answer that question? I think it was kind of a broad question to other populations too, but certainly would be open to getting exactly the facts.
Deputy Director. Proceed.
Mr. Chair, members, no, we don't need to sample every year. It's based on the management need. For wolves, as an example, being that they are on the endangered species list, it's important for us to have annual data, and we do those population estimates annually. An example of one we don't is our deer population. We manage that throughout the state, but we do not have annual data. We use other index data, such as the number of animals harvested, et cetera, that can help us inform population trends.
Representative Finke.
Thank you. And then I'm going to just ask you to stay at the table for a moment. When you do these population surveys, is the purpose of them just to have a count, or do you do analysis? Like, when I'm listening to this conversation, I know we have like the wolf conversation, right? And let's like set that aside right now. But we're also having this is about habitat range, right? And migration and the population of wolves. And the population of wolves depends upon the population of all of these other species. And we want to follow the science. And it seems to me like as big of an indicator would be climate change as any other factor in why and where animals are ranging, especially based on the deer population, which we just heard is we know the population of deer in the state is very variable to climate and what we're seeing. So I would be curious to know if when you do these surveys also offer any analysis of why changes may be happening?
Representative Finke, I just first want to thank you for the context for your question, because the wolf conversation can be challenging, and I think that the context is well taken, and this, we'd like to just get a better idea what the data says so we can make more informed decisions. Deputy Director, if you'd like to take that question, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Fickey, I think when we're talking about wolf populations, we're talking about getting the best estimated number of animals out there. That's one bucket of information. The second piece of why are their populations trending upward or downward is a whole different field of research. So population dynamics, we're looking at putting collars on wolves so we know where they are, they know what their home range is, and we can estimate that pack size. So that's really about population numbers and a little independent of climate change. But that is other work that we're doing related to habitat and habitat changing. So a good question, but a little bit adrift from population numbers for wolves.
Yeah.
Representative Finke, follow up.
Yep, just a quick one, because it's helpful for me to understand these things, as a statewide lawmaker. We were just having a conversation about how we want land to make money, right? We don't want it to just sit there. And it's like the human impact on the land, the way that humans are changing the landscape, and the way that all of this work that we're doing has the same impacts on these animals, right? Which also have a right to the land, in my opinion. So it just feels like taking a sort of whole view of that, right? Like if we're taking land out of the wilderness and making it a productive part of the capitalist economy, that's also going to have an impact on where wolves live, right? Everything we're doing is having a ripple effect on everything else. I guess that's just the definition of nature. But I appreciate you being here, because I think that sometimes we get sort of laser focused on this idea of like how many wolves are there, and then where are they taking cattle or deer, and then how do we respond to that specific question when all of these things really have to be drawn out together. Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Chair Heintzeman, and thank you for this bill today. I think it's important to get a good idea of what is happening across the state. And I think some of the challenges come, maybe it's anecdotal, maybe there's real. But when people, maybe they've observed wolves and seeing it maybe outside of the area of its historic range. Maybe they've been just simply driving down the road, maybe they've been hunting, or maybe they're out checking their livestock. And unfortunately, when I think that there's a large distrust in the public, especially outside of northeast Minnesota. The further you get away from the core wolf range, when we say, well, there's not wolves there, or it's an anomaly that there are wolves there, becomes a distrust in the public with the DNR that they're maybe not managing or keeping account or really having a good understanding of what it is, and it's maybe not fair to the directors and the heads of it, because they're doing the job that they have been told to do, and at the same time there's getting to be a mistrust with the public on what the DNR is doing. And I won't go into all the acronyms of what DNR might stand for with some of the public, but some of the things that we do know about wolves is the research that's happening is, there's about 20% of the wolves that are just, they are lone wolves. They're not in the pack. That was, there was a figure that the DNR had shared a couple weeks ago, was that there's about 20% of them that are lone wolves. And Representative Fisher, I would agree with you. The largest number of depredation we've had on our farm is by lone wolves. And, that's, there hasn't been a hunting season in Minnesota since 2015 or 14, I think it is. And there isn't, so there's lone wolves that are causing issues, and that isn't necessarily a hunting related cause from that. It could be, maybe it was a vehicle accident, or I don't know what the reason that, I don't think science has the whole reason of why a wolf is a lone wolf.
But I think also as we see, the historic habitat of wolves, there were historically in lower population areas, less roads, and I'm seeing, in my area, a lot more wolves, which it's not an ultra low population area, but, we're also seeing these wolves actually, we can see, if you get a fresh snow, you'll see the tracks going right down our county road. They're using the roadways. So it's, I think the wolves are adapting to a higher density population of people as well. And so they're encroaching into new areas. And I thank you for the study. I'm a co-author on it. And I really think that, we need to adjust the parameters of what we're looking at. Because if you don't look for it, you probably won't find it. So, thank you.
Members, I have up next Hanson, and then Jacob, and then Purcell. Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Schultz. Checking on data protections for the data of the wolf locations. Do you have a provision in your bill to protect the sites? Is that public information where the wolves would be identified, or is that protected as non-public information?
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's not a provision inside this bill that protects that data. I will say, as we continue this conversation, certainly I think that this bill can be enhanced and we can make an even better product. And then as a part of the conversation, I would just say, the DNR is currently doing this within the realm of, the current, as you see in your packet, the current wolf range. And I would fall back first to their current practice before I go about trying to upset the apple cart.
Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll just reference, and I can't remember the exact location, but a few years ago there was a University of Minnesota research site fairly close to the Twin Cities, not too far away, and there was a den established, and there was publicity about the den. And then suddenly there were no more wolves. So I think it's important to try to protect the data because even though wolves may not be legally taken, we all know that they are taken.
Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Heintzeman. Thank you, Representative Schultz, for bringing this forward. But Representative Fisher, I have to set the record straight. You spoke for my district that we want more wolves in southeast Minnesota. I have a large constituency of small and organic livestock farmers, medium-sized livestock farmers. Do we have too many deer in southeast Minnesota? Absolutely. Is my district clamoring to have wolves be the solution? Absolutely not. So I just needed to correct the record. Thank you.
Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I probably have a question for the DNR director, if he can come back up. Thank you, Mr. Rivers. For expediency's sake, Mr. Chair, my question is, I think you mentioned in your testimony that you would prefer this not be in statute. Can you elaborate on what a preference for making sure this work happens but not having it in statute? What does that look like instead? Thank you.
Deputy Director Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, I think what we could do is take a look at our results from the 2025 range survey as an example, and maybe there's a public process where we can say, hey, this is what we see as our current wolf range, and see if there's a way that if we're missing something. In terms of putting it in statute, if we could forecast ahead, let's say 20 years, and wolves are no longer on the endangered species list, and maybe we don't need to be sampling them every year or estimating the numbers every year. I think we let the conditions of the management dictate how we do that work. There might be other pressing needs that we have that we put our resources toward, as opposed to an annual wolf survey, especially in places like southern Minnesota, southwestern Minnesota, where we're pretty certain there are no wolves.
Representative Purcell, anything else? Seeing no more questions, members, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and especially on my birthday, I appreciate the fact that you heard this bill, especially one that has such great passion in my own community. I'm very grateful for that and the words of support. Members, if you want to help restore the public trust, members, if you like good science and good data, then you are invited to add your name as a co-author to this bipartisan piece of legislation. There's plenty of space for each of you around the table, and I'm committed to making this bill even better. So I appreciate your support, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Representative Schultz, you continue to move that House File 1331 be laid over for possible inclusion. It's laid over. Vice Chair Burkle, if you would make your way.
Chair Heintzeman, would you like to move your bill? House File 1382.
I would. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Members, House File 1531 is before you today because Minnesota law is about to sunset a provision that temporarily allowed crossbows to be used in the taking of game during the archery season. My bill eliminates that sunset. There's a lot of personal experience that I have around crossbows. A number of years ago, I injured a shoulder and had to go through the process of getting a doctor's note so that I could apply to the DNR and go through those steps to weeks later find out, have you been approved, haven't you been? And that was prior to legalization, which happened just a number of years ago. I'm proud that the bill before you today has some bipartisan support. There's folks on both sides of the aisle that appreciate what the full legalization offered. I did hear earlier today from DNR that there may be some opportunity to address some concerns they may have at a future date, but the motion today is to move the bill to the general register. So I'll just conclude my comments by just saying, it's not just folks with an injured shoulder, but it's a number of folks also, like my kids, a lot of kids around the state who have benefited from being able to use a crossbow. Initially, I was somewhat apprehensive, like, is this really the right move? And I want to just point out that over time, as I'm seeing the positive impact, that I became a believer, even though I had the opportunity and, my shoulder was the issue. I know there's a lot of others that just simply benefited, enjoyed it. There's a stat that I wanted to close with before we go to questions, and that's that I believe upwards of 40% of deer taken during the archery season were taken with a crossbow. And a lot of people obviously using this form of archery. So I will leave it there, and I think we have a number of testifiers.
Thank you, Chair Heintzeman. Your motion is to move, just so everyone knows, House File 1531 to the general register. Our first testifier is Eric Simonson from Minnesota Deer Hunters Association. Proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Eric Simonson. I represent the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association. We are thankful to Chair Heintzeman and the other co-authors of House File 1531, which would eliminate the sunset on the crossbow hunting allowance, in particular our concern around deer hunting, and we are happy to support this bill. Deer hunting continues to have over a $500 million impact to Minnesota's economy every single year. Whether it's by archery, muzzleloaders, or firearms, the MDHA continues to advocate for policies that encourage more people to get out into the field and enjoy the traditions associated with hunting. As you know, the legislature in 2023 legalized the use of crossbow by anyone during Minnesota's archery season, which runs from mid-September to the end of December. We are seeing the data come in for the 2024 season that indicates north of a 16% increase in deer taken by archery than in 2023. Not all of that is attributed to the legalization of crossbows for all, but it definitely plays a factor. We know even within our own association that crossbow users tend to fall into the categories of younger, older, and female hunters. There are other reasons to choose a crossbow over a more traditional recurve or a compound vertical bow as well, including personal preference. Most importantly, the MDHA can always encourage more hunters to get involved in hunting and conservation, and by removing the sunset, we can continue to see more and more interest in archery hunting going forward. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House File 1531.
Thank you for your testimony. Next up, we have Barbara Keller from DNR. Please identify yourself for the committee and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Vice Chair, Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Barbara Keller, and I am the Big Game Program Leader with Minnesota DNR. I'm here to discuss House File 1531, Expiration of the Crossbow Allowance for Archery Deer and Turkey Hunters. The DNR does prefer to develop a recommendation regarding the future of crossbows during archery seasons based on the results of our season evaluation, which will be complete this October. The past legislation did direct us to submit a report to the legislature by October 2025 regarding the effect of the legislative change allowing crossbow use by any archery deer hunter. And we are currently conducting a survey of all deer hunters, including a oversample of our archery deer hunters, to assess the effect of this change on their hunting experience, as well as to assess the differences in effectiveness of crossbows and vertical bows and wounding loss between the weapon types. We are also planning to conduct a survey of turkey hunters this summer to evaluate the impacts on turkey hunting as well. The results should allow us to estimate the number of newly recruited archery hunters and assess the difference, again, in wounding loss and weapon effectiveness between the weapon types. We also intend to thoroughly assess the effects on this change on our deer and turkey harvest. Specifically, we are interested in the change in our antlerless lottery deer permit areas. These are areas where our archery deer hunters are allowed to take an either sex deer, while our firearms deer hunters must enroll in the lottery in order to take an either sex deer. So we're interested in the effect of this change on our harvest in these areas specifically. I can share a few statistics in our first few years of this change. We obviously only have 2 years of data to assess, but we have seen the crossbow proportion of our archery deer harvest increase from 2023 to 2024. In the first year, 43% of our deer taken during the archery deer season were attributed to crossbow harvest. We did add a question to our deer registration process asking successful hunters whether they used a crossbow or vertical bow to harvest their deer. So that is how we are able to assess the effect of this change on our deer harvest, as well as our turkey harvest. Although we have seen that increase from our first year to 2024, the effect on our overall statewide deer harvest seems to be minimal. In the 5 years prior to this change, archery deer harvest accounted for 13% of the overall statewide harvest. That has increased to 16%. So firearms deer harvest does continue to drive our overall statewide deer harvest. We've also seen that youth hunters older than 50 years of age and women are more likely to use a crossbow to harvest their deer. Similarly, with turkeys, we have seen less of an effect on the turkey harvest. This is likely because hunters must choose between the archery season and the firearm season. They can't have both licenses. So we've seen less than 10% of the turkey harvest being taken with a crossbow. About half of those using crossbows were older than 60. Less than 15% of those who harvested turkey during the first 2 seasons were 17 years old or younger. It may be that as people become more familiar with crossbows, because the archery turkey season is so much longer than the firearms turkey season, we may need to reassess the length of those seasons based on what we see with regards to an increase in turkey hunters due to the crossbow change. That's all I had for you today. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you for your testimony. That's it, right? Is there anyone in the audience that would like to come on up? Please identify yourself for the committee and proceed with your testimony.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick Amrud. I'm the Vice President of Minnesota Bow Hunters and the President of Midwest Big Game Hunters. So regarding HF 1531, I noticed that no one had compiled all the data from all the other states, especially the Midwest states. And I just want to emphasize that this is way more than just an archery issue, because what we're seeing is in other states, especially Ohio, that's had 3 to 4 generations of crossbow use now, we're expecting Minnesota to go from 12% of the total buck harvest coming from the archery season to upwards of 50 to 60%, and potentially more because Minnesota is a 1-buck state. So when we look at Wisconsin and Michigan, they can only shoot 1 buck during the archery season and 1 buck during their firearm or muzzleloader season. Minnesota's not like that. So yes, there has been rapid adoption of crossbow use, but when you add a weapon that is more efficient and easier to use, we do expect that to happen. And another thing is, looking at all the data from other Midwest states, it hasn't increased the total number of hunters. That is still declining, and the states that have crossbows, just like Minnesota, we're seeing about the same decline in hunters. And there are youth and elderly that do use a crossbow, but most hunters are fully capable of shooting a compound or traditional bow. Bow hunting is hard. It's a very unique experience that we appreciate, and this doesn't have to be an all or nothing. We can have an early archery season for archery, and then we can split and have a later season where we start to allow crossbows to be used at the start of the firearm season. That would give us 8 weeks of archery and then 7 to 8 weeks of crossbow use. We think that's more than fair for the people that have purchased crossbows in the last couple of years, and it would reduce the negative impacts of early season crossbow harvest on both archery season and for the general firearm season, because all it does is convert compound and firearm hunters to crossbows. There's no net increase in hunters. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to testify for or against House File 1531? If not, member questions? Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Chair Burkle. Thank you, Chair Heintzeman, for the bill and for the testifiers. I was looking at the submitted letters of support and opposition, and this might be a DNR question. There's this suggestion about creating a separate license for crossbows, and I think the last testifier, for example, brought up some of the issues around that, and I'm wondering how the DNR is looking at this. I know we just had kind of a 2-year trial, or perhaps the bill author. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair Heintzeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will defer to the DNR, but I will mention, Representative Purcell, that I carried legislation prior to full legalization that would have allowed a hunter during the rifle season who had a valid archery tag to use a crossbow. And I'm recalling back to some of the discussion, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, it really didn't have a lot of support. So that is an idea that was out there, and I was trying to see if there might be an alternative to the full legalization option. So that has been something that we worked on. This bill really is here today because with full legalization under this temporary sunsetting language, so many people have decided this is something I want to try, and they like it. And it does seem with so many that have moved towards using a crossbow, as we've heard in testimony already, that it probably just needs to move forward, and that's why I brought the bill. But I'll defer.
Director Keller.
Vice Chair, Representative Purcell. That is one of the things that we'd like to take a look at with those surveys to our hunters to see what their attitudes are, specifically our archery deer hunters, to wait and assess based on that whether we would recommend a separate license. That being said, the complication of regulations is something that we're always concerned with at the DNR, so that's something that we'd weigh heavily whether we'd want to add another license.
Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And is it correct, my understanding is that there's a rifle season only in one part of the state? I remember seeing legislation around that a couple years ago, too, or a particular type of firearm that's only in certain parts of the state. If you can refresh my memory on how that works, since it's not statewide. Thank you.
Director Keller.
Vice Chair, Representative Purcell, I think you're referring to our shotgun zone. So that is a boundary that runs roughly halfway through the state, a diagonal, where south of that line you can only use shotguns, and north of the line you can use rifles. It is something that's frequently discussed in this committee, but that shotgun zone remains in place.
All right, Representative Purcell.
Thank you. My last question.
Sure.
So I'm wondering why that is, and if then looking at sort of crossbows, I mean, one of the letters in here has concerns about turning the lower half of the state into a pay-to-play because there's not as much public land, and I'm wondering if where that that pre-existing line around hunting that the DNR already has, if that would be applicable here, and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Director Keller.
Vice Chair, Representative Purcell, the origination of that zone, it's been in place for quite some time. It was actually put in place based on concerns of deer vulnerability in the farmland region, and the notion that we might over-harvest deer if rifles were allowed in that part of the state. That's no longer a concern with the DNR. We now actually have higher deer populations in southern Minnesota compared to northern Minnesota, where our deer populations are struggling. So that no longer is the case, but it remains in statute, and so it is up to the committee to change that.
All right, thank you. Seeing no more questions, members, I'll move to Chair Heintzeman to close. If you'd like to close your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members. This is, I think, a good idea that we would just go ahead and move forward with the language to allow crossbows going forward in Minnesota. It, as I said earlier, does have bipartisan support, and I think that generally, you go back into your districts, you're gonna hear a lot of people that appreciate that they don't have to go through the process that I was describing earlier, where you get the evaluation and the doctor's note, and then the application, like I said, to DNR, and then wait. I think they really appreciate that they can take advantage of this if they choose. And I know there's people that have tried crossbows and decided they want to go back to a recurve bow or a compound bow, more traditional archery hunt, and sometimes that's what someone might want, but there are a lot of others that have made the investment and appreciate that the law has been changed. And I have to admit, I was one that was apprehensive, wasn't really too enthused about this, but once having had the opportunity, it was something that I enjoyed very much. So, Mr. Chair, I would renew my motion that House File 1331 be referred to the General Register.
All right, members, Chair Heintzeman has renewed his motion. House File 1531 will go to the General Register. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're done, right?
Not one, no.
With that, members, we're adjourned.